Did you know that the American bison were the first to invent base jumping? All that and more today on Pan Murray Outdoors. So today we're going to be talking about the American bison. I wanted to do an in-depth kind of history around the American bison before going and hunting them in December. Hunt out to South Dakota with my buddy Seth. Um, I just wanted to kind of similar to what I did with wild boar here in the southeast. I kind of wanted to give a little bit of regional history on the animal and kind of context around it. Historically speaking, I'm a history student after all, and it only seemed fitting. That being said, I wanted to do it right and make it um, very well researched for you guys. So I took quite a bit of time putting it together. I've got notes, and hopefully it's going to be entertaining, and hopefully it's going to be a little bit educating. And yeah, so let's get into it. So first things first, when we're talking about the American bison, uh, most people know what that is. There's actually two subspecies of the American bison. There's the timber bison and there's the plains bison. The distinction is that the timber bison, or forest bison, woods bison is what my notes say. I like timber bison. It sounds cool. It's sort of the same distinction between Rocky Mountain elk and like Roosevelt elk. The forest bison are a little bit more square in that hump over their shoulder, and they are also a little bit bigger. So they kind of have a slight distinction there, and then obviously the other distinction is kind of where they're located and where they live. So it's these minor adaptations to the local ecology of where they are that kind of distinguishes them. The one that people are most familiar with are the plains bison because they're the most portrayed. But the woods bison are probably more prevalent now in their ability to survive in our modern culture. Um, these animals originally came from Europe and Asia. The American bison, which is its scientific name is bison, which is hilarious. They originally came from, yes, they were the steppe bison. So there's the European bison and the steppe bison that was in the Eurasian continent landmass. And the European bison is now basically the closest relative to cattle. And the steppe bison migrated over the continental land bridge at some point, with human beings obviously following it. And that's what would evolve into our modern day bison. And during that process, they had, I think, bison antiquus and bison latifrons, which is the one with like super long horns. It looks like a Texas Longhorn, but in bison form. Very cool. And those would evolve into our modern bison with two subspecies of woods and plains bison. Their closest relative currently, by the way, is yaks, whereas the European bison's closest relative is cattle. So now that we got that out of the way, roughly prior to European colonization or contact with the North American continent, there was roughly somewhere in between 30 and 60 million bison in the North American continent. And their range was all the way up in Alaska, all the way down into Mexico, and almost touching the East Coast, but definitely on the east side of the Appalachians, somewhere in that mid-range, in that Piedmont. They didn't quite get to the coast. And through most of the Rockies, not quite into California. So they had a huge range of basically most of North America, all realistically, of North America, except near the coastal areas and places like that were just hard to get to or didn't provide enough fresh water and grasses for them. They are bovines, basically. They eat mostly grasses, wild grasses in the regions, but they'll also forage on acorns and other things, especially if they're the woods bison. Um, And these animals were very, very popular to prehistory hunters, pre-European history hunters. Um, so Native Americans and people along those communities, but also in Europe, the European bison and the steppe bison were hunted long before, in prehistory. Here in North America, they were hunted by Native Americans for centuries, basically since the last ice age. And the way that Native Americans in the United States would hunt these bison prior to European contact. They didn't have horses and they didn't have firearms, obviously. So their methods for hunting these animals would include chasing the animals over cliffs, which is what I hinted to at the beginning of the video, chasing them into deep snow, or chasing them onto thin ice. And the idea would be that as these animals fell off the cliffs, there would be more natives down at the bottom to kind of finish them off with spears or arrows. Or as they went into like deep snow, then the natives could walk up on snowshoes and spear them. Or as they fell into thin ice into water, natives could then get up to them on canoe and kind of finish them off. These methods of sort of trapping or tricking the animals were the most common ways to kill these animals. There's all sorts of different locations where this is documented as having happened over and over again. There's one cliff in South Dakota that is said that it was most frequently used about every 25 years. So it wasn't used like every single year, because obviously I feel like you would have to have the bison fairly close to where the cliff is already to then chase them in that direction to get them to go over the cliff. So it's a little bit of an action of opportunity. But within about every 25 years, this would happen, and there are the remains of over 10,000 bison at the base of these cliffs, which is insane. And to understand this in context, also, Native Americans would not have had the ability to control how many of these bison would have gone into these traps. So the reason that there's so many remains at the bottom of these cliffs is because they would not have had the capacity to take them all. Right? Your village might need 100 bison to get through the winter, but when you chase a herd towards a cliff, 100 might go over, 500 might go. You don't know. And there's no great way to stop them. You can't run out there and try to stop them. You get trampled. So it was a little bit of a waste in that sense. That being said, natives prior to European contact, prior to getting a hold of horses, realistically, weren't able to put enough of a dent in the bison populations to really hurt it all that much, even with these mass harvest methods. And when they would have these mass harvests, they would oftentimes do something called gourmet butchering, which there's a lot of evidence in their archaeology that kind of shows this, where they would take choice cuts of the animals, because that's the other thing is preservation. You have to carry everything or drag them with like dog sleds, basically. So you're only able to take so much from these animals. So what you do take is you take the best parts, you take the hams, you take the parts that you like the most, and they're easy to cook, most tender parts, that type of thing. So there's a lot of gourmet butchering, and this kind of flies in the face of another thing I wanted to address very quickly, which is this idea that like Native Americans used every part of the animal. It's true in the sense that they had a use for every part of the animal, but they didn't use every part of every animal they killed every single time. They were very comfortable with the idea of we're going to kill a bison, we're going to take the back hams, we'll take the back straps, we'll take organ meat, stuff like that, and then the rest will leave here, because to them, right, it kind of flies in the face of our modern idea of morality, but to them, leaving something behind, it fed the vultures, it fed the coyotes or the wolves. It wasn't wasting anything. It was just a part of life. And also they had limitations on what they could take and what they could carry. So yes, they had uses for every part of the animal. They could make, water jugs out of, stomach. They could make, string out of sinew. They could make, maybe a particular bone's really good for making forks. But how many forks do you need? How many times do you need a new water jug? How much string do you need? There's natural limitations to how they would have conducted themselves. And this is documented all the way through European contact as well, not just from the archaeological evidence. Um, you know, it's very common. But it was always in purpose of like feeding themselves and surviving that they were doing this prior to European contact still. And so prior to gaining horses, that was kind of the way it was. Now, there would be major drop offs in bison populations due to like droughts, severe droughts that would hit the plains, or extreme winters that would actually freeze the bison out. And this would kill off large portions of the bison. Floods would even kill off large portions of the bison. So things were hitting the bison, but for the most part, they had a very large, very stable population throughout North America. Upon European arrival via the Spanish originally, and then quickly following them, the English and the French, native communities started gaining access to horses. Now, this is very important to understand. Most of these native communities in North America were at best semi-nomadic. Most of them were actually settled and completely agricultural. And as the introduction of the horse came, a lot of these tribes saw this as an opportunity to be more mobile, to become completely nomadic, and to follow the bison entirely. Groups like the Comanche saw this as an opportunity to basically follow the bison 24/7, only kill them, don't do any agriculture, just live on the plains, basically. And it makes you much harder to reach by your enemies. And it gives you access to the bison all the time so that you can take hides, meat, bone, whatever from the bison and trade it with other native communities and with Europeans to get weapons, to get agricultural crops that you're no longer growing, all the things that you no longer are able to get for yourself because you're, nomadic. And they also saw it as an opportunity that they could kind of be a little bit far and removed from Europeans and their neighboring native communities, so that they could then end up raiding those communities and kind of taking that stuff. When they couldn't get those things through trade, they could ride in, raid, take their stuff, and then when they tried to come back and get their stuff, when the Spanish and then later the Mexicans, or when the Apache or whomever would go after, say, the Cheyenne or the Comanche, and try and get their stuff back or get revenge or anything along those lines, the Comanche could just disappear into the plains because that's where they lived. They were entirely on horseback. They were entirely nomadic. And the only thing they needed was bison to live off of. They no longer needed agriculture. They originally practiced agriculture. They gave it up to pursue bison entirely. And so it gave them a newfound independence and kind of a way to not be reached, which is oftentimes why the Plains tribes of North America did so well for so long. If you look at kind of an expansion map of the Spanish and then later the Mexicans, they kind of stop at the Comanches, and they kind of stop, natural settler movements kind of stop there. And, as California and the gold rush is happening, people would dart through Comanche territory and not settle or stop or try to put up post lines because they would just constantly get raided and shot all to hell. And this is, roughly, you're talking about Texas mostly, up through California, basically in between Mississippi and the Rockies, and frankly, the Mexican border, with the United States and the Canadian, well, a little bit past the Canadian border. It's a huge swath of area that these people were able to naturally kind of blend into, follow the bison. The bison were very migratory, and because obviously, if you haven't heard of 100,000 bison, they eat up the grass in whatever location they're in very quickly. So they have to constantly be moving to find fresh pasture to eat. So the addition of the horse also changed the way that the Comanches were able to hunt. They were able to do mounted hunts now, which is sort of the classic image that you see of Plains tribes hunting bison. You don't usually see the imaging of like them chasing off cliffs. They stop doing it after they get access to horses, because horses allow you to chase the bison, run at the speed of the bison, and then ride up next to one of the bison and hand select which ones you're going to shoot. You can pick the fattest ones, you can pick the largest ones. You no longer have to do this mass harvest where you're getting every calf, old bull, whatever that goes over the cliff or gets stuck in the snow. Now you're getting the cream of the crop that you choose to harvest. So it gives them a lot more selection and also increases their productivity. They're doing the chase off the cliff method every 25 years. They can do this every time they want to. In the span of 1 or 2 hours, a group of Comanche hunters can chase a herd of bison and kill 1 to 200 prime, high quality bison. And they're not torn up by falling off a cliff or half of them being lost by falling, into a lake or a river and washed under the ice, or, at their worst in the dead of winter when they're the skinniest and they have the least amount of fat on them, shot in the snow. You can hunt them during prime time. You can pick the best animals. And in the span of 1 or 2 hours, you can kill several hundred of them. So this made the bison trade for the Comanches and Plains tribes very, very profitable and made subsistence off of these animals and the sort of nomadic lifestyle very, very doable. And so it was a great system, probably from like 1600s-ish up to about the 1800s, where these native tribes were able to basically subsist off the bison. And the bison weren't all that bad off for it. Even with the increased harvest rates by the natives, they were still doing pretty well. This would change about mid-19th century, where everybody knows about the market hunting that by this time Americans, but also Europeans. It's European fur market basically that's pushing for the hides from the bison that would lead to the market hunting of the bison. There's also several other factors, right? The American government pushed for the bison to be hunted down because it cut into the food source for all these nomadic tribes that the federal government was trying to conquer, trying to fight, trying to move on to reservations. Also, the market hunting was the encouragement for the market hunting. There was a profit to it. The other thing is that a lot of times these bison were a huge hindrance for settlers. If you want to come in, put up fences, put in your own domestic cattle, and start to farm the area, you can't have bison coming through and destroying your farm, destroying your fence lines, destroying everything else. The creation of barbed wire is one of the inventions that would come out of this time period, mostly to hinder the movement of bison. Cattle were pretty decently fine with the standard, post fences, but bison had a habit of running straight through those. And so these different factors led to a lot of hunting of the bison. And this is where you get the images of, Dances with Wolves is a great movie to reference both of these things. You see the mounted hunting in that, where they're riding right up next to the animals and shooting them as per selection. And then you also see the scene where they come up across where market hunters had shot all these animals, taken the hide, taken the tongue, and then leave the rest of the animal to rot, because those are the profitable things. They don't need the meat. And so this is when things start getting very wasteful and the animals start dying pretty rapidly. Natives would also feed into this market hunting. They saw an opportunity to basically get money, get supplies, get guns, firearms, stuff that they desperately needed to keep competition with, their European counterparts. Native Americans basically saw this as an opportunity to get all the supplies, guns, firearms, gunpowder, metal, more horses. And to them, they had oftentimes a belief, because they came from a culture where, so few bison would be harvested every year, and there's 30 to 60 million bison in total. It basically seemed like the bison were never ending. And so they often had beliefs that the bison could not possibly go anywhere. So they didn't see a problem with hunting them for the market. They didn't conceptualize the idea that they could truly run out of bison, because there were so freaking many. And that kind of gets me to sort of a slightly different point than what you've probably seen on the History Channel and stuff like that. There's a great book called The Destruction of the Bison by, I can't remember his first name, but his last name's Eisenberg, so Dr. Eisenberg. And he's an environmental historian. And he talked about how, yes, natives and settlers market hunting the bison had a huge effect on their population. and natives gaining access to horses and increasing the hunting of the bison even before that also damaged their population. But when they start crisscrossing the plains with barbed wire to fence in all these new ranches and properties for these guys to put in their cattle, they start to limit the ability of the bison to migrate from region to region and find the resources that they need because they can't get through the barbed wire. So you're starting to hem in these bison and limit them out of resources. So their populations are getting smaller and smaller because of that. Then you're adding in competition with cattle that people are going to both free range and keep within barbed wire. So you're cutting out even more resources. Then you're going to add in the fact that there's a bunch of invasive grasses that settlers are going to bring not only from like the East Coast, but from Europe and other places like that. And these plants are going to come in and compete with native grasses, which is what the bison usually use. So now you have multiple environmental factors playing against the bison already before you even add in the market hunting and the, exerted effort by the federal government to eliminate the bison to hurt the native, right? So you add all of those factors in together, and the destruction of the bison, as is the title of Eisenberg's book, was set complete. By 1884, there was an estimated like 325 bison left in North America. Now, obviously, that's a rough estimate. There were probably more than that, hidden away in different regions that were hard to get to. Obviously, there was the woodland bison that were going to be more hidden away in sort of the forests of Canada or kind of up in the Rockies a little bit. There was the herd in Yellowstone, obviously, that was able to survive basically through all of this by the early establishment of that park and the protection of them by park rangers. And so there was kind of this, by the turn of the 20th century, kind of this pushed effort by conservationists like Teddy Roosevelt to sort of preserve the few bison that were left. Most of them were in private herds and stuff like that, owned by ranchers or whatever else, kind of as oddities. I mean, they would be in zoos and stuff like that. And the idea was like, let's get these bison together. Let's start trying to bring back the population. Let's save the few wild ones that we have left in Yellowstone Park and stuff like that, and try to bring these populations back. And they did this over an extended period of time. I think one big group is like the Texas Goodnight Herd. There's the Yellowstone one, the Blackfoot tribe. They have their own herd of bison on their reservation. A bunch of different groups. You can actually still hunt wild bison in several different national parks where they basically have programs to like weed out their herd. But then you can even go and hunt wild bison in Alaska, where there's a wild herd of bison that's doing okay in southern Alaska. And there are some in Canada. I think right now there's estimated by 2017 there was 500,000 bison. Now, bison would be a little bit different than, say, elk or white-tailed deer. Even though they're on private ranches, elk and deer, put into high fences and heavily managed and fed and kind of treated like livestock, would be seen as kind of not maybe as sportsmanlike to hunt, or it's just a different version of hunting, I would imagine. And it's not something that could be comparable necessarily to hunting them wild, like a wild elk herd or a wild group of deer. Would be a lot more difficult to get access to than a private herd behind a high fence. Bison, it's a little bit different. Bison on a 20, 30,000 acre ranch are going to migrate around that ranch, eat the wild grasses, drink the water, do the normal things that bison always do, brave the winter, stay in a herd, fight off predators, all the same things they did if they were wild. They just happen to be hemmed into a 20 or 30,000 acre area. Modern hunting of bison, which is what I'll be doing this December in South Dakota with my buddy Seth. Modern bison hunting is, whether you are doing a wild herd or whether you're doing a private ranch herd, we'll be doing a private ranch herd. It's pretty much the same. watch failed YouTube videos of Yellowstone Park, like tourists and stuff like that, bison will let you get very close to them, because bison basically judge things based off of size. They're the biggest mammal in North America, and they don't worry about a lot, right? A big pack of wolves can take down bison. Bears have been known to do it. That's about it. They're not going to look at a person, average size being 200 pounds, let's say. They're not going to look at a grown man and be all that concerned, because they're 12 to 1400 pounds and will just railroad you. I mean, just bulldoze you. So they're not very concerned about people. They'll let you get fairly close. Now, if you get too close to them, this is where the Yellowstone Park fail videos come into play. They'll charge you and do what I just described. They'll just, trample you basically, or, catch you with a horn and, throw you. So when it comes to hunting bison, the challenge is just finding where the herd is. Once you know where the herd is, you can walk within rifle distance of them and shoot them. It's very easy. That's why the market hunting was so prolific. It was incredibly easy. They are basically, in essence, cows. They're very aggressive cows. You can't walk up and touch them like you can a dairy cow. They will fuck you up in that sense. But they're pretty moderate as far as like hunting goes. They're not like a white-tailed deer that's super spooky and you have to scent covered and they have to know you're not there and all this stuff to get close to them to make that shot. They're not like elk that are kind of weary and looking for people, and if they catch a whiff of you, they're gone. Bison are a little bit more easy to hunt, frankly, and they're a big target. Hence me doing things like I could take my 300 Win Mag that I shot that elk with, and I could set up 300 yards away from a group of I'd set up 100 yards away from a group of bison, and they'll just mill around as if I'm not there. Doesn't matter how loud I am. I could drive the truck up to it, right? And this could be on a national park. This could be a wild herd in Alaska. It could be any bison anywhere, right? They don't care. You're too small for it to matter. And I could take a shot from there. I'm trying to do it with a falling block 45-70 with iron sights. That's one of the guns that would have been used by market hunters during sort of the market hunting phase of the destruction of the bison. And I think it was kind of a throwback to that history of that time period. I do love the Old West. And so using that weapon, I feel like makes a lot of sense, just for the historical kind of aspect of it. And there's a little bit of challenge to it. I thought about using a bow, not a traditional bow, but a compound bow. My only hesitation with that ended up being that we were going out to South Dakota, where there's basically no cover. And so sneaking up on a group of bison was going to be pretty difficult in that scenario without any trees or bushes really to hide behind. I mean, it's basically going to be a blanket of snow and bison. It's going to be kind of hard to get close enough to make an ethical shot without getting trampled and without, you'd be getting so close that they do decide to run away. So I felt like the falling block was a natural kind of, in between. A little bit more challenge to it, a little bit, you gotta get within 50, 60 yards realistically. You gotta take careful aim, make a good shot, do a lot of practice with the rifle beforehand. You guys have been seeing all that. I feel like that's the right move to go. So this has kind of been the history of bison in a very, very short, condensed version. I really didn't do it all that much justice, I don't think. But there's a long history of these animals being hunted by humans. And we are partly responsible for them. We played a large part in them and responsibility for them being almost wiped out. But we also played a huge part in bringing them back. And now we have their populations under careful management. And we're doing a really respectable job of trying to keep these animals in play and kind of keeping them. I mean, they are the quintessential American animal, I mean, the European and the steppe bison, died out a long time ago. These are the only bison left, and they are quintessentially American. They are found in America. They are predominantly in America. Their predominant natural range was America. So I think hunting them isn't necessarily for the challenge, although I am trying to make it challenging. I think it's for the history. I think it's for kind of a homage to these animals, to the history of hunting these animals, to the tragic but then also kind of heroic sort of story of the bison, of being brought to the brink of extinction and then being brought back, right? Poor hunting management and poor thought process by some people, and then really well thought out long term processes that help reverse that and bring them back to sort of status quo. As far as hunting private herd, I think when it comes to an animal like the bison, I think a private herd on a ranch is a great thing. I honestly think the way that this entire country realistically is crisscrossed with barbed wire fencing, even on public lands. I mean, out west, how many fences do you have to cross when you're out there hunting? Bison can't jump those fences. Bison can't get through those fences. So even if you release them out onto BLM land in whatever, Colorado, Wyoming, wherever, you basically still have a fenced-in group of bison. No matter what you do, these animals are somewhat fenced in and kind of hemmed in unless you get them in a really untouched place like a national park, or Alaska, because Alaska is awesome. So I think a ranch having a private herd of bison is still a really valid way to hunt bison and go after bison and get bison. So I'm really excited about it. I hope you guys stick around for the journey, and thank you guys so much for watching.